If you think about the price of oil as a gauge of economic health, well, we know that globally economic health has been decimated by the coronavirus pandemic. Demand has really fallen off a cliff, and so too with it the amount of oil, the amount of energy that's needed to fuel the world's factories, the supply chains that carry all our goods all around the world, that power our businesses, that too has tumbled. The problem is the major oil-producing nations continue to churn out millions of barrels of the stuff, even though demand was clearly falling. They didn't react to that. That has led to a glut, and whenever you have a glut of anything, demand is falling, then prices also tumble. And that is what is happening here. Making matters worse, if you recall, a couple of weeks back, there was a spat between Russia and Saudi Arabia, two of the biggest producers. Neither side would give in, and both sides ended up producing even more oil. Then last week, President Trump, in fact, rarely to his credit, did manage to step in and produce a deal, managed to get Russia and all the other major oil-producing nations to agree to cut production, including the US, because don't forget, the US has also become a major oil producer too. But the problem is those cuts, millions of barrels a day, have not yet kicked in. And what you've got now is worries that the amount of storage for all this oil that's sloshing around the system is imminently going to run out, particularly here in the US. That has caused this major price crash today to levels below zero. So effectively, you will have producers begging buyers. In fact, really, in negative price territory, they will have to pay buyers to take the oil off their hands. This is an unprecedented situation. Oil prices always suffer during economic crises. They always tumble. Never before have they fallen this low. Never before have they fallen into negative territory. And that really underscores, Kathy, the extent of the crisis that we are in here. And again, I say this all the time and don't mean to sound negative, but there are no signs really that the global economy is going to pull out of this crisis anytime soon.
Siobhan in Washington, D.C., thank you very much for joining us. Well, Katie Martin is the markets editor for the Financial Times and joins us now from her home in London. Katie, you probably listened into Siobhan just then. I mean, how extraordinary is this in your view, Katie?
Oh, this is right up there. I mean, we've had a really rough run in markets over the past few weeks, but this is quite something. The oil market has never seen anything like this before. At the worst point, this particular contract for oil was trading at $40 below zero, which means not only are producers paying people to take the oil off their hands, they're paying a fair chunk to have people take this oil off their hands too. Now, yes, there are some market technicalities here around what types of oil from which parts of the world are capable of being stored in particular locations. But the big picture here is that demand for oil has just completely collapsed as a result of this pandemic. All those aeroplanes that have been grounded, all those car journeys that we're not making anymore, all those factories that have been shut down, that just absolutely destroys demand for oil around the world. And there's just too much of the stuff and nowhere to put it in certain places.
Well, what does happen to this excess oil then?
Well, they're just going to have to find a way to cut down production somehow. I mean, unless there's a huge spike in demand anytime soon, it's difficult to see this situation going away. So, yes, this has affected a very particular contract of oil. It's a particular US contract. But unless there is a surge in global demand, it's very difficult to see how this goes away. Even the Brent oil price is down about 9% today, which would be a big day for oil if it hadn't been for this collapse in the US.
So what are the implications for the industry, but also for the economy as a whole?
For the industry, this is really challenging for those US shale oil producers, which have kind of sprung up from pretty much nowhere over the past few years and are now one of the biggest suppliers of oil around the world. It's helped to make the US one of the world's major suppliers. This is going to be extremely difficult for them. A lot of them are loaded up with lots of debt. It's going to be difficult to see how they're going to pay it back. This has been one of the big concerns that's been gnawing away at markets ever since markets started collapsing as a result of this pandemic, is what's going to happen to these shale oil producers. Can they handle oil at these levels? Nobody can handle oil at these levels. Now, when you look at oil prices, these particular oil prices in a couple of days are going to look very different because this is a particular contract for delivery of oil in May,
right,
and there should be some more capacity in June. Nonetheless,
okay,
this is a market in a mess.
Katie Martin, thank you very much for joining us.